The Princess and the Carpenter by Sylvester Scoforu. Princess Amelda of Franstonia, 18 years old and supposedly the picture of royal grace, rode her white horse through the countryside with all the confidence of someone who had never been thrown. The wind caught her emerald gown and her carefully braided hair, making her feel like she was in one of those romantic paintings that hung in the palace corridors, the ones where princesses looked wistful and beautiful and never had mud anywhere near them. Then her horse, Snowdrop, spotted a small mud puddle. To be fair to Snowdrop, it was a very suspicious puddle. It might have contained anything. A frog, a reflection that looked like a frog. The concept of a frog. The horse bolted sideways with such enthusiasm that Imelda barely had time to think. Oh no, before she was airborne. Years of deportment training kicked in, and she managed a reasonably graceful tuck and roll that would have impressed her riding instructor right up until the moment she landed sitting in the puddle, water up to her waist, hair plastered to her face in a way that was decidedly unportrait-like. She sat there, blinking muddy water out of her eyes, watching Snowdrop gallop toward the horizon like she was being chased by the hounds of hell. Traitor, Imelda muttered. The sound of hoofbeats, or rather, the somewhat less majestic sound of donkey beats, approached. Imelda looked up to see a young man, perhaps 20 years old, trotting up on a gray donkey that looked about as impressed with the situation as she felt. The young man had dark, curly hair, warm brown eyes, and an expression that was clearly trying very hard not to be amused. He failed. "Are you hurt, my lady?" he asked, his voice only slightly strangled with suppressed laughter. Imelda grunted sarcastically. "WTH. Not physical, just my pride." The young man giggled, actually giggled, and Imelda found herself torn between indignation and the strange urge to laugh herself. He stepped down from his donkey with easy grace and offered his hand. His palm was calloused and warm, and he pulled her up with surprising strength. "Thank you," Imelda said, trying to wring out her gown with as much dignity as possible, which was approximately none. "I don't suppose you saw which direction my horse went." "Toward the next kingdom, I'd wager," the young man said, retrieving a large cloth from his pack. "Here, it's clean. Well, cleaner than you are at the moment." Imelda took the cloth and dabbed at her face. "You're very kind for someone who's laughing at a lady's misfortune." "I'm not laughing at your misfortune," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'm laughing at the way you landed. That was actually quite impressive. Most people just fall face first." "I'll add it to my list of accomplishments," Imelda said dryly. Princess Amelda of Franstonia, adequate at falling. The young man's eyes widened slightly. "You're the princess?" "Unfortunately, yes. And you are?" "Randolph, carpenter's son. Also a carpenter." He bowed, which looked slightly ridiculous given that she was still dripping mud. "I'd offer you a ride, but Barnaby here," he patted the donkey, "is already carrying my tools, and I don't think he'd appreciate the extra weight." "No offense." "None taken. I wouldn't want to burden Barnaby." Imelda looked down at herself. "I don't suppose there's a palace nearby where I could clean up and pretend this never happened?" "There's a stream about half a mile that way," Randolph said, pointing. "And I'm headed in that direction anyway. I could walk with you if you'd like, in case you encounter any more dangerous puddles." Despite herself, Imelda smiled. That would be appreciated. As they walked, Randolph proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to. He told her about his work. He was building a new barn for a farmer in the next village, and she found herself genuinely interested in the way he described the grain of different woods and the satisfaction of fitting joints together perfectly. "It's like a puzzle," He said, his face animated. Except when you're done. People can keep their cows in it. That's the best kind of puzzle, Imelda agreed. Then, because she was tired of being Princess Amelda for a moment, she asked, "Do you ever make anything just for the beauty of it? Not because it's useful?" Randolph's expression softened. "Sometimes. I carved a bird once, just to see if I could capture the way a sparrow tilts its head. Took me 3 weeks. Did you capture it?" "Almost. The head was a bit too large. Made it look like it was judging you." Imelda laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep in her chest. "I would very much like to see a judgmental sparrow." "I'll make you one," Randolph said, then seemed to realize what he'd offered. "I mean, if that's appropriate, do carpenters make things for princesses? Is there a protocol?" "I have no idea," Imelda admitted, "but I'd like one anyway." They reached the stream, and Randolph politely turned his back while Imelda did her best to clean the mud from her dress and hair. When she was as presentable as she was going to get, they continued walking, and somehow the conversation turned to more personal things. "Are you betrothed?" Randolph asked, then immediately looked mortified. "Sorry, that's probably not appropriate either." Imelda's good mood dimmed. "Yes, actually, to the King of Gal." "The King of Gal? Isn't he old?" 47, Imelda said flatly. "And widowed, and apparently in need of a young wife to secure the alliance between our kingdoms." "That sounds." Randolph searched for a diplomatic word. "Terrible? Yes." Imelda kicked at a stone. "But it's been arranged since I was 12. The treaty has kept peace between Franstonia and Gal for 20 years. My marriage is supposed to renew it for another generation." "That's a lot of pressure for one person." "You have no idea." Imelda glanced at him. "What about you? Are you betrothed to anyone?" "Me? No. Carpenters' sons don't really do betrothals. We just meet people, fall in love, hopefully, get married if we're lucky." "That sounds nice," Imelda said wistfully. "It is," Randolph said, "except for the part where you have to actually talk to people you fancy, which is terrifying." "Oh, and are you talking to someone you fancy right now?" Randolph turned slightly pink. "I'm talking to a princess who's covered in mud and betrothed to a king. So yes, but also it's completely hopeless, so I'm trying not to think about it too hard." Imelda's heart did a small, unexpected flip. "For what it's worth, I'm enjoying talking to you two." They smiled at each other, and for a moment, the world felt full of possibility. Over the next 3 weeks, Imelda found excuses to ride through the countryside. She told her parents she needed fresh air. She told her ladies-in-waiting she was practicing her horsemanship. She told herself she was just exploring her kingdom before she had to leave it. But really, she was looking for Randolph. And somehow, she always found him. Or he found her. They met by the stream, in meadows, once in a village square where he was delivering a table and she was pretending to inspect the local market. He made her laugh. He listened when she talked about her fears about marrying the King of Gal. He taught her how to identify different types of wood by their grain. She taught him court dances in a clearing, humming the music while he stepped on her toes and apologized profusely. "You're terrible at this," she said, breathless with laughter. "I'm a carpenter, not a dancer," he protested. "My feet are used to staying on the ground." "Then we'll just have to practice more." And they did. They practiced dancing. They practiced talking. They practiced being together, even though they both knew it couldn't last. One afternoon, as they sat by the stream sharing bread and cheese that Randolph had brought, He presented her with a small wooden carving. "Your judgmental sparrow," he said. Imelda took it carefully. It was perfect. The bird's head was indeed slightly too large, giving it an expression of profound skepticism. She laughed and then, to her horror, felt tears prick her eyes. "I love it," she whispered. "Imelda," Randolph said softly, "I know I'm just a carpenter's son. I know I have no right to say this, but I don't." Imelda interrupted. "Please don't say it, because if you say it, I'll have to say it back, and that will make everything so much harder." Randolph took her hand. "What if I said it anyway? Then I'd tell you that I love you too," Imelda said, tears spilling over, "and that I don't want to marry the King of Gal, and that I wish I was just a regular person who could marry a carpenter and be happy. We could run away," Randolph said desperately. "I could take you somewhere. And break the alliance? Randolph, without that treaty, Gal and Franstonia could go to war. People could die. I can't be responsible for that." They sat in miserable silence, holding hands, watching the water flow past. 2 weeks later, Imelda stood in the throne room with her parents and the King of Gal. King Edmund was a tall man with gray hair and a kind but tired face. He looked at Imelda with something that might have been sympathy. "Your Majesty," Imelda said, her voice steady despite her breaking heart, "I must be honest with you. I don't wish to marry you." Her mother gasped. Her father stood up from his throne. King Edmund simply nodded. "I see," he said. "May I ask why?" "Because I'm in love with someone else," Imelda said. "A carpenter. And I know that's not appropriate. And I know our marriage is important for the alliance. But I can't lie to you. You deserve better than a wife who wishes she was somewhere else." King Edmund was quiet for a long moment. Then he sighed. "I appreciate your honesty, Princess, but I'm afraid I must inform you that without this marriage, I cannot renew the alliance treaty." "Edmund," Imelda's father said urgently. "Surely we can discuss. The treaty was contingent on the marriage," King Edmund said firmly. "Those were the terms agreed upon 20 years ago. If there is no marriage, there is no treaty." Imelda felt the weight of kingdoms settle on her shoulders. She thought of Randolph, of his laugh, of the way he looked at her, like she was just Imelda, not Princess Amelda. She thought of the judgmental sparrow hidden in her chambers. Then she thought of war, of soldiers, of families torn apart. "Wait," she said. "I'll do it. I'll marry you." "Imelda," her mother started. "No," Imelda said. "It's fine. I'll marry King Edmund. The alliance is more important than my personal happiness." King Edmund looked at her with something like respect and something like sadness. "Very well. We'll proceed with the wedding." Randolph heard the news from a merchant in the village. The princess was getting married in a month. There would be a grand celebration. The alliance would be renewed. He went home and tried to work, but his hands shook too much to hold his tools properly. He'd known this would happen. He'd always known. But knowing didn't make it hurt less. He carved another sparrow, this one with its head bowed, looking sad. 3 days before the wedding, King Edmund requested a private audience with Princess Amelda. They met in the palace gardens, away from listening ears. "Princess," he said, "I have a confession to make." Imelda braced herself. "Yes, I don't want to marry you either." Imelda blinked. "I'm sorry." King Edmund smiled ruefully. "You're a lovely young woman, Imelda, but you're 18. I'm 47. I have children older than you. The thought of marrying someone young enough to be my daughter makes me feel like a villain in a cautionary tale. Then why? The treaty, Edmund said. When it was written 20 years ago, the marriage clause seemed reasonable. I was newly married myself, happy, not thinking about the future. But my wife died 5 years ago, and suddenly I was expected to marry a child to keep the peace. He shook his head. I've been trying to find a way out of this that doesn't break the alliance. Have you found one? Imelda asked, hope flickering in her chest. Possibly. Tell me about this carpenter you love. So Imelda told him. She told him about the puddle, about the judgmental sparrow, about dancing in clearings and talking by streams. She told him about how Randolph made her laugh and listened to her fears and treated her like a person, not a princess. When she finished, King Edmund was smiling. Here's what I propose, he said. The treaty requires a marriage to unite our kingdoms. It doesn't specify which marriage. I don't understand. I have a daughter, Edmund said. Princess Margot. She's 23, intelligent, and has been managing half of Gal's diplomatic affairs for the past 3 years. She's also been corresponding with your brother, Prince Thomas, for 2 years. Did you know that? Imelda's eyes widened. Thomas has been writing to a princess. Every week. They've never met in person, but I've read some of the letters. Margot leaves them lying around, and they're quite smitten with each other. They write about philosophy, governance, their favorite books. It's actually rather sweet. So you're suggesting a marriage between Margot and Thomas would unite our kingdoms just as effectively as a marriage between you and me. More effectively, actually, since they're actually in love and closer in age. They'd be partners in ruling, not just a political arrangement. Imelda felt like she couldn't breathe. But the treaty specifically mentions me. The treaty mentions the union of the royal houses through marriage. It was assumed that meant you and me, but technically, any marriage between our families would fulfill the terms. Edmund's smile widened. I've already had my advisors review the language. It would hold. Why didn't you suggest this before? Because I needed to know that you were willing to sacrifice your happiness for your kingdom, Edmund said gently. A ruler needs to be willing to make hard choices. You proved you could do that. Now, I'm giving you a different choice. Imelda threw her arms around the king, who laughed and patted her back, awkwardly. There's one condition, he said when she released him. I want to meet this carpenter. If he's not worthy of you, the deal's off. Randolph was working in his father's shop when a royal carriage pulled up outside. He assumed someone important needed furniture and tried to make himself presentable, brushing sawdust from his shirt. Then Princess Amelda stepped out, followed by a tall man in royal robes. Randolph, Imelda said, her eyes shining. This is King Edmund of Gal. He'd like to speak with you. Randolph bowed, so low he nearly fell over. Your Majesty. I don't. Relax, son, Edmund said. I'm not here to have you arrested for falling in love with a princess. I'm here to see if you're good enough for her. For the next hour, King Edmund asked Randolph questions about his work, his family, his intentions toward Imelda. Randolph answered honestly, his hands shaking, certain this was some kind of elaborate punishment. Finally, Edmund turned to Imelda. He'll do. He'll do. Imelda repeated, that's it. He's honest, hardworking, and clearly adores you. Also, he didn't try to impress me with false bravado, which I appreciate. Yes, he'll do. Edmund looked at Randolph. Young man, how would you feel about marrying a princess? Randolph looked at Imelda, then at the king, then back at Imelda. Is this real? Am I having a very specific dream? It's real, Imelda said, taking his hand. Edmund's daughter is going to marry my brother instead. The alliance will be preserved, and I'm free to marry whoever I choose. And you choose me? Randolph asked. A carpenter's son? I choose you, Imelda said firmly. A carpenter's son who makes judgmental sparrows and falls off donkeys and makes me laugh. Yes, I choose you. Randolph kissed her right there in front of the King of Gal and his father and probably half the village who had gathered to see what the commotion was about. When they finally broke apart, Edmund was smiling. Well then, I suppose we have 2 weddings to plan. 6 months later, there was indeed a double wedding. Prince Thomas married Princess Margot in a ceremony that involved a great deal of philosophical discussion in their vows and made several elderly nobles fall asleep. Princess Amelda married Randolph the carpenter in a ceremony that involved a great deal of laughter and at least one reference to mud puddles. The alliance between Franstonia and Gal was renewed, stronger than ever. Thomas and Margot proved to be brilliant diplomatic partners, modernizing trade agreements and establishing new cultural exchanges between the kingdoms. Amelda and Randolph built a house on the edge of the palace grounds, close enough that Amelda could still participate in royal duties, far enough that they had privacy. Randolph's workshop became famous throughout the kingdom for its beautiful furniture, and Imelda discovered she had a design talent, sketching out ideas that Randolph would bring to life. King Edmund visited often, becoming a sort of honorary uncle to both couples. He never remarried, claiming he was too busy being a grandfather to Thomas and Margot's eventual children and teaching them how to play chess. And in Amelda and Randolph's house, on a shelf in the main room, sat 2 wooden sparrows. One looked judgmental, one looked sad. Together, they looked like they were having a conversation about the absurdity of life, love, and happy endings, which Imelda thought every time she looked at them was exactly right. The Yendi. Be sure to like and subscribe to SCO's Media YouTube channel for more stories by Sylvester Scoforu.